I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Brad Olsen. First, a couple of announcements. Check out Brainsupreme if you're ready to start your microdosing journey with the highest quality ingredients available. Visit their website using the link right in the description, and you'll get 15% off your order. That's brainsupreme.com. Use the link in the description and get 15% off your entire order. Also, if you listen to Forbidden Knowledge News through any audio podcast platform, listen through Spreaker, always free for you. We are booking guests for March and April. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome back to the show Brad Olsen. He's an award-winning author, book publisher, and event producer. His keynote presentations and interviews continue to enlighten audiences at several events, and he has appeared on dozens of radio and television shows, including Ancient Aliens, America Unearthed, Beyond Belief, and Mysteries of the Outdoors. Brad, welcome back. How you doing?
Hey, Chris. I'm doing great. Always nice to be back on Forbidden Knowledge News, where we talk about all things forbidden.
That's it, man. It is great to have you back. Always enjoy our conversations. I'm looking forward to hearing about your latest adventures and research. You have a new book out. You also have some updates to the Antarctica mysteries about a possible Nazi U-boat route under the ice. Also, you just got back from Borneo. So much to discuss here. Before we get too deep into any of it, remind the audience that may not be familiar just a little bit about yourself and let them know where they can find out more about you.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, well, you can find out more about me and the projects I'm working on at bradolsen.com, just like it's spelled. That is also my conference schedule upcoming. If you want to come hear any of my talks, they're all listed there. And also you can go to cccpublishing.com is the publishing website that has all my books, as well as a lot of other authors, such as Laura Eisenhower, Michael Jaco, Leah Lyons-Zagami, Lon Milo Duquette, and others. So if people were to get one of my books from CCC Publishing, then I'm able to sign copies for people. It's the only way to get a signed copy, apart from seeing me at a conference and getting one at my book table. So invite people to check that out. And you can also read all the books using the Google Books app on CCC Publishing. So check that out and
awesome.
Get your book sent out as soon as I get it.
Man, I'll have links easily accessible for everyone who wants to check that out. Let's start with some of your latest adventures. Brad, tell us about Borneo. What brought you there?
So 7 of my 10 books, my first 7 books, were all travel-related books. So I was doing a press trip to the country of Malaysia in January, and part of that trip was to the island of Borneo, which is just above the equator and has 3 countries in the island. And the biggest part is Indonesia in the southern part of Borneo, but there's also Malaysia on the top half, and then tiny little Brunei is a sultanate in northern Borneo. So I was going to the area of Sabah, which is the northern portion of Borneo, and was doing some trekking around Mount Kinabalu, which is the tallest mountain in Southeast Asia between New Guinea and the Himalayas. I wasn't able to climb the mountain, which was my intention coming into this trip, but I just didn't have enough lead time because you got to book a guide and they restrict the amount of hikers in there. But I got to the beginning of the hike and the botanical gardens around there, and I wrote an article about volcanoes around the world and highlighted Mount Kinabalu. Also did a great trek into the primary jungle, is what they call the old growth rainforest, and that was with Borneo Tours. That's the website, Borneo Tours. And they took us in some incredible caves and also hiking, trekking through the jungle and going to eco villages near waterfalls. It was really amazing. But sad to say that most of the primary forest in Borneo has been cut down, starting in the 1980s and continuing to this day. They're under 10% of their old growth rainforest is all that's left. And it's since turned the once clear rivers orange and has taken its toll on the people who used to live in the forested areas, as well as the orangutan. And the reason is, once you take down the big, large teak trees and ironwood that hold up the canopy of the rainforest, then the jungle starts growing from the bottom up again. But while you have the canopy, it's so thick, it's so dense, that very little light makes its way all the way to the bottom of the canopy. So the people who lived there just 25 years ago were able to sustain themselves with hunting in the jungle, wild boar, or fishing in the rivers, now all clogged up from deforestation. And it's forced these people who just 80 years ago, Chris, were still headhunters. I mean, they're just 2 generations removed from Stone Age lifestyle. Now they have to live with money because they can't grow their own food. They can't hunt or fish anymore, not like they used to. And so now they're forced into the system. Similarly, the orangutan, these large primates that live in Borneo and other islands in Southeast Asia, they too are taken out of the food chain because they cannot gather their food on the floor of the jungle. So they have to put them all into sanctuaries, which is really sad. There are still a few wild tribes left. And when we were in a portion of the primary jungle, there was a report of a young juvenile orangutan coming down to the trail, and they were spotted. So the good news is the jungle is coming back. Some of the older trees or the newer trees are old enough to start becoming a middle canopy type forest. The jungle is still very thick because once orangutans, especially the males, reach maturity, they're too heavy to climb in the trees anymore. So they have to live on the floor of the jungle. And when there's no canopy of trees, it's too dense for them to move around or find food. So unfortunately, they have suffered the consequences of deforestation too. But there are groups that are working hard to bring back all of the habitats of animals. And we saw some other wild monkeys and lots of birds there too. So it was just a great way to, leave cold North America in the middle of January and go down to Malaysia and Borneo for a couple weeks and experience life in the
Right
jungle.
on. Well, you've traveled over much of this planet, and you were just mentioning the deforestation and how some of these tribes were forced into the system. It doesn't seem like there's too many places left that hasn't seen the fingerprint of these parasites, this globalist order that is infesting everything.
Yeah, you said that exactly right, Chris. It is pretty much a worldwide phenomenon of exploiting natural resources. Even Antarctica is now under threat of the Antarctica Treaty, which preserves the whole continent as a biosphere, as a reserve. They are trying to break down the treaties so they can go in and mine and harvest the minerals and the animals of Antarctica. So it hasn't quite happened yet. So I'd say Antarctica is pretty much the last place that hasn't been exploited, but they're trying, and it might happen.
Well, since you mentioned Antarctica, let's get some updates to some of the research that you've done. We had you on a couple of times to discuss the trip you took out there, which is incredible. But can you tell us anything that has been revealed recently?
Yeah, I'm working on my 11th book. It's called Secrets of Antarctica. It'll be out at the end of this year. But I have this really great research assistant that heard me on an interview, and we got in touch with each other. And his line of research is the same as mine, which is looking into the high technology of the Germans, both before the war and then afterwards, and their incredible ability to use their U-boats to go vast distances, and very advanced U-boats to go all the way down to Antarctica, sometimes without even coming up to the surface for oxygen or to travel. That they were the predecessors of the nuclear submarines. And the latest version, they were just rolling out in 1945 at the very end of the war, that became part of the Fuhrer's convoy. And this research assistant, who he lives in Denmark, he speaks German fluently, and is able to go through a lot of documents that have come out ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, when a lot of very top secret documents and files and video went to the black market in 1990, 91. You could show up in Moscow with a suitcase full of hard currency, dollars perhaps, and buy some of these files. In fact, there's alien autopsy videos that came out of Russia that were leaked at this time. There are crashed UFO videos. And as it pertains to my research, there are these maps that show the under ice environment in Antarctica. It's really amazing. There were over 150 of these maps that were printed up at the very end of World War II, December 1944, and they were 150 of these maps for the U-boats that were still going out in 1945, for the captains to be able to navigate a route down below New Schwabenland, the claim of the Germans, to go under the ice with, as you know, Germans are very precise in their calculations, when to dive, when to come up, how far to go. And it was all under the ice. And they would come up to a lake and then travel across the surface of the lake and then dive down below the ice again and come up at a place where the officers and the crew were meant to read Packet 3, which is how to speak to the people of Agartha. They use that name specifically. And so with this research with Frank, not only these very advanced U-boat submarines that were able to dive down to the depths that were required in the map, but they were also they were recruiting young men who usually were orphans or had no family back home, and it was largely a one-way trip. There was a letter from one of the U-boat soldiers who somehow got this letter out, but was saying that he was on a one-way trip, that they're not held hostage, but they're going in and they probably wouldn't be able to ever come out again. And he's saying the theory of inner Earth is true, that we're down here and we're going to this city under the ice called Agartha, or I think this is where they also built or co-opted their new Berlin base. So there are two bases in Antarctica founded by the Nazis before World War II even started. One of them was Base 211, and I do believe, I know the location of that is near the Schumacher Ponds or the Schumacher Hills. At least that's where the exploratory party found an entrance also under the ice. But that was more of a near surface base with a couple of outbuildings. And then this New Berlin base was much larger. This is where most of the personnel and all of the discs that the Third Reich were working on during World War II were able to be dismantled and fit into some of these larger U-boats in the Fuhrer's convoy that all went missing at the end of World War II. Well, a couple of them turned up in La Plata, Argentina, in the months following World War II. And they even admitted that they were part of the Fuhrer's convoy and they had just come back from Antarctica and for whatever reason had to surrender in Argentina, especially U-boat 530, in which the captain spoke of their trip under interrogation and told the Americans what they were doing there. So this has opened the whole possibility that some of the German Navy never did surrender. In fact, there's over 100 U-boats in the German Navy that have never been accounted for, never been found either. And many of these are in this Fuhrer convoy. So with my research and working with this man, Frank Kammer, we were able to find and chart out the route that those U-boats took from the time they went under the ice offshore New Schwabenland straight on through under the ice to get to this lighthouse of Agartha, where they were meant to surface and open packet 3 to speak to the people of this inner Earth. But it's not really inner Earth under the mantle of the Earth. It's actually just under the ice, because the polar plateau around the South Pole area is where the ice is about 2 miles thick. And because Antarctica is the most volcanically active continent in the world, you have the propensity for these large under ice domes to be created. In fact, they've already discovered quite a few of them using sonar, scanning the top of the ice shelves and using ground sonar technology, including large freshwater lakes under the ice that never freeze from the geothermal activity. So it's quite plausible that these U-boats were able to navigate very deeply into the interior of the Antarctica continent. And then so what I found so interesting is when we plotted out the route of these U-boats from these maps that were leaked at the end of the Cold War, it was almost to where the geographic South Pole is located. And that's very important and interesting, because that's also where Admiral Byrd, who is the very first pilot to fly over the South Pole in the late 1920s must have seen this massive hole under the ice, because at the beginning of Operation High Jump in late 1946, he flew back with just a single pilot, and they went off the radar for 3 hours, presumably flying into this massive hole. And they went down and they visited the domain of the Ariani, according to his diary, and that too is very close to the South Pole. So I think we could even put them together. Agartha, domain of Ariani. They, of course, with the Aninurbe Society, the Germans were very interested in finding the root race of the Aryan people. And so these are all similar sounding names in a similar location 2 miles underneath the ice.
Wow, that's crazy. These maps, are they accessible to the general public?
Yes, they are, if you know what you're looking for. And if you would like, I could share screen and show a few.
Yeah, let me turn your screen share on. That'd be great. All right, you got it.
Let me just start out by showing you what these nuclear submarines look like. And the Walter Boat V80, do you see that one? Is that on there yet? Okay. And then, actually, if I can, are you seeing the whole screen?
I see your whole screen.
Can I just...
You can probably just pull them up as you go.
Flip over, yeah. These are all in the chapter called Nazis in Antarctica. These are some of the passports to New Schwabenland.
Really?
That they found of some of these young military men. And there are also officers that were part of this Führer convoy. There's an officer, and it even says right there on the passport, Kriegsmarine, Führer convoy.
Do you know if these have been authenticated?
Yes, they have. Frank did some research on this, and we found that the Kriegsmarine were very much that Führer's convoy, a very real thing within the division. I don't know if we have found that these individuals have been verified yet, but the Germans were in charge of so much high information. Here's that letter from Karl Unger. And he basically says that the U-boat commanded by Captain Heinrich Broda, veteran officer of the Third Reich, believing the theory of an existence into the interrealm. Among those aboard U-boat 209 was an old friend, Karl Unger. I received his communication. This is the person who received his letter sometime after the war had ended. I know it is genuine. I know his handwriting well. The approximate translation of Karl's letter is as follows. Dear old comrade, this news will be a surprise for you. The U-209 U-boat made it. The earth is hollow. Dr. Haushofer and Hess were right. The whole crew is well, but they cannot come back. We are not prisoners. I am sure this news will reach you. It is the last connection then from U-boat 209. We will meet again, comrade. I am worried for everyone who has to spend his life on the surface of the earth since can't read that last word. Under here is gone. God bless our Germany always, with hearty greetings, Karl's Unger.
Wow.
And so there's just all of these corroborating pieces of evidence, Chris, that shows that this is where these U-boats disappeared. Corroborating evidence, how they did it. Here's the most advanced submarine, which, by the way, a lot of these submarine scientists came over to the United States with Project paperclip. And they helped the United States create nuclear submarines and these very advanced, very fast submarine types. And that's how we got such a head start. Of course, we've all heard of Project Bluebeam and Victor Schauenberger creating the disc shape during his early years. But I want to find the maps, because this is when it really gets good. Chapter on, you're getting a little preview here.
This is great.
The book. Okay, here it is. Yeah, never before seen. It's all going to come out in my book this year. So Frank de Kamer has written in English what a lot of these German names are, and we still cannot figure out what Valkyrischer Ocean is. So if any of your listeners can give any kind of qualification of where that might be, that would be great. And so the other location in these maps is called Asgard, another A word. So there's 3 A words: the domain of the Ariani, Asgard. You've also got, and it's on here, the city of the Asses. That's a 5th one. The Aryan people, and Agartha. 5 A names. And so you can see here where the city of the Azaris is. This would be the entrance under the ice. And on the map is a U-boat, Sturmkaput der Kurzmarine. So that means U-boat fulcrum of the German Navy. So repair station, refueling, supplying station. Here's New Berlin. It's right on the map within this landmass called New Schwabenland. So Frank and I presume that you're coming under the ice shelf, and by the time you get to the first land area, that is the land mass that's holding up New Schwabenland. There is a big mountain range, all with German names. And under the ice, they also set up their city, New Berlin. And so it is on an island, and to the north of this is the city of Assis. Why this island of the mountain Sandgin also is marked remains unclear. Frank says, I assume it is explained in another set, that is map 3 of the instructive maps that is being mentioned on the larger map, of which there is a cutout, and only was to be opened after reaching the lighthouse of Agartha, which is not shown here, but is mentioned in this map. So let me find the full map of this, because this is when it really gets interesting, because it also shows these different ways to get through the continent. And this is what it would look like without the ice on top. So the ice is in blue. Frank charted out the green line, the entrance to Agartha from the German maps. And you can see how close it is to the South Pole. Close where, and that is also in the direction where Admiral Byrd also found the giant hole under the ice. And I've spoken with Brian S., who is the whistleblower for Linda Moulton Howe, and he described to me and to Linda in great detail when they defied orders to fly over the no-fly zone that they saw this hole in the ice. And there were tracks coming from the South Pole Station for snowmobiles, for snowcats. There was actually a road that corkscrews down into it, and it's protected by the NSA. So this map here, this is also on the big blue map that I just showed you. This is another part of it that shows the direction that the U-boats would take. And so you can see it starts out in the ocean, dives down, then comes up into a lake under the ice. and then travels some distance before it drops down again under the ice. And then at the end, where it pops up, not far from the South Pole, is where they are to open packet 3 for their introduction into Agartha. So this is just incredible research. I got to hand it to Frank DeCommer for allowing me to share this. Here is just detailed information about how they did those dives. So it's not only represented in map form, but it's also written out to the U-boat captains. And these were individually created with a stamp on each one for the 150 U-boat captains that were going out in 1945 to Antarctica. So at the end of the war, they were very, very interested in getting material and personnel out of Germany and then down there to Antarctica. But I'd say some of it also went to South America, where they had very large land holdings. And still to this day, the wealthiest people of South America are the Germans. Wow. And so when you have these diving instructions, this is the same form that Frank translated. So dive to a depth of 400 meters, which is very, very deep. So only those advanced submarines at the very end could probably make it. We've also found some under ice cities with the help of Dr. Michael Sala and others. It's just an incredible amount of research we found here, largely based on these incredible maps.
Now, if this is all true, it would add to the possibility that maybe extraterrestrials aren't coming from outer space, different planets. Maybe there are very advanced beings that live in these inner Earth realms. And on top of that, you hear about the theories of breakaway civilizations, this Fourth Reich that came out of the Nazi regime that was given extremely advanced technology by supposedly these beings. Could it be that this is still the same breakaway civilization that has a lot to do with the situation we're in collectively, the New World Order, some of the agendas that have come out of it? What do you think?
You're right on the tip there, Chris, because Frank has also started to interpret several of these other illustrations, such as the one on the right is from the Markarov file. So this guy was working on the Aninurbi information. So the Society for the Prehistorical Spiritual German Aninurbi, which is them looking into their origins. Very, very top secret stuff, but was collected by the Russians at the end of World War II. They were the first to get to Berlin. And when they got into the Navy department, it was this treasure trove of documents, including ancient Tibetan, what kind of looked like a mandala, but then the Reichsfuhrer, the Aninurbi Society, working under the Fuhrer himself. He was a total occultist. Mm-hmm. Hitler, Himmler, Hess, Goebbels, who financed the Antarctica trips, they were all really into this stuff. And so they took this Tibetan mandala-looking image out of Tibet. So this is really interesting, too. The Germans go in this big expedition in the mid-late 1930s. About 1936, 37, came back at the beginning of 38 with detailed instructions from people that they had met under the Tibetan plateau, taken there by the Dalai Lama himself and very high Tibetan monks to this inner earth below Tibet. They returned with the directions to go this under ice route. And all of these Tibetan mandala stuff that the Aninurbi Society has made into this schematics for inner Earth. As you see on the left, Frank has translated the German from this very same Tibetan finding and showing the layers of Earth and how everything is flipped, which I find really interesting. And I'm not sure how to make sense of that. But the magnetic North Pole is at the bottom, where the geographical South Pole is on the outer surface. And you can see the ice layers on the surface there, the fire lava of the middle, and the eastern poles. So, so then this Russian general, I think, or very high-ranking officer who was working on the Ahnenerbe files in the late 1980s. He was confirmed to have been working in this department 84, 85, but in the late 1980s, when Soviet Union was starting to show cracks, he offered this information for sale on the internet. So it started to sell this very top secret information that the Russians had gained from the Germans at the end of World War II. And then about 40 years later, were selling it on the black market. And it's also a whole bunch of these maps from Tibet that they got, the Germans got in the mid-1930s before the war even ended. And so they took them back, the Ahnenerbe, which was under the SS, by the way. The SS, the Schutzstaffel, was basically like our CIA, a very advanced secrecy and working directly under the Fuhrer and Hermann Hesse, as well as Himmler was the head of the SS. And they were going deep into all this esoteric information from Tibet, and then finding a way to send their U-boats. They got the exact directions from Tibetans to go underneath the ice in Antarctica. And this is all in the Merkurov file. And then there's also the ROM file, which also included those maps I showed you, this other data dump that came a few years later. And in the ROM file, Frank has done a deep dive into that and starting to break down all the information found in there. This was the KGB, the Secret Service of Soviet Union. They tried to reproduce the route with their own submarines a few years after the end of World War II, trying to use the schematics I showed you under the ice. But when they got a little distance in, they were met by 10 other submersibles that made them turn around. So the Germans were invited in, and they were allowed in. The Russians were turned away. Then the very next year was Operation High Jump. And that's when the Americans came on the surface to try to attack Base 211 near the Schumacher Hills. And they did bring a submarine, which was sunk, as well as losing more than half of their planes and one of their destroyers called the USS Murdoch. And the ROM files talks about the route of Operation High Jump. So another data point showing, and it even talks about these UFOs coming up out of the water, attacking Admiral Byrd's flotilla. Could have taken every single ship out, but Moore wanted to send a message back: don't mess with Antarctica. And of course we didn't. And on the return trip, Admiral Byrd gave an interview with a journalist from El Mercurio newspaper, which I reproduce all this stuff in the new book. It's going to be great. It's really groundbreaking information, especially with all these different illustrations and graphics. But Byrd gave an interview right after high jump, and he said that we would be confronted with an enemy that has the ability to fly pole to pole at incredible speeds. So as soon as Byrd gets back, he's read the riot act. He shouldn't have given that interview. He shouldn't be talking about this. In fact, he was given a gag order for the rest of his life, never to talk about what happened in Antarctica, both with high jump and his flight into this inner Earth, which happened, of course, before the Battle of High Jump. But he was a military man and still had to take his orders, and then went to confront the Germans in New Schwabenland offshore. And that's where the Battle of High Jump was only 20 minutes long and was totally a rout. They could not shoot down these craft that came up out of the water and then disappeared back into the water after 20 minutes. And that's why High Jump ended 2 months into the 6-month expedition. And then the whole story of Admiral Byrd, who tried to give little veiled clues. So there was the Longines interview he gave a year before he passed. He was in great shape, should not have died as young as he did. There may be foul play involved in that. But he gave this interview, the black and white interview with Longines' watch, and he says some very peculiar things. He says that the new explorers can go down to Antarctica. These are the last unexplored lands of the world, he said, especially beyond the pole. And nobody really knows what exactly he meant, because up on the polar plateau, there's nothing but ice for hundreds of miles in all directions. So there is no such thing as beyond the pole. It's the exact same any direction you go, unless you're going to this hole in the ice, which is depicted in this Tibetan, deciphered by the Anunnaki Society as this area both in the North Pole and South Pole region. By the way, Admiral Byrd was a very accomplished aviator. He was also the first aviator to fly over the North Pole, although some historians think that he didn't quite make it far enough, but he could have made it far enough to see this massive hole in the ice. And my colleague Brooks Agnew has the coordinates for the hole in the North Pole region. And we were talking about doing an expedition there around the time COVID hit, but that got delayed. So the Earth is like a toroidal field. There's an in and an out, which also happens to be portals in and out to the Vega star system. And that's perhaps why, mention ETs under the ice, Chris, why Antarctica is such an important hub for UFO activity.
Aside from the possibility that it could be a portal to a different star system, when you look at all the information that's come out over the past couple of decades about UFOs and our government and all the research pointing to the stars and pointing to something outside of our atmosphere, when we could be looking inside of our Earth, and that seems like a great possibility, especially with all the information you just presented, and a lot of research that's been done in our modern age points to the possibility that it's extremely advanced humanoids, or if you want to call them extraterrestrials, they're from somewhere else, that have been here the whole time.
You're right on the tip, Chris. That's exactly my line of thinking, and Frank's as well. And I don't want to give away everything in this interview, but I'm also going to show one of the 3 massive ships under the ice. So these have been known about since the 1970s by our own intelligence agencies, namely the NSA. Remember, no such agency? Well, they were tasked in the late 1940s when they were created to cover for everything extraterrestrial. So if there was a down crash, they would do the crash retrieval. If there was a live or dead alien, they were in charge of helping them out. and working with that, or creating a cover story like Close Encounters of the Third Kind at Devil's Tower, where they had to fake some kind of virus leak. They would do all that. They were Johnny on the spot, as well as down in Antarctica. And they had nickname for the three large craft that they knew about under the ice. And they nicknamed them Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, named after the three ships of Columbus's original voyage. Yeah. And I'm quite confident that I've located one of those three, and it happens to be in the New Schwabenland area at a location called the Conan Base, which is still a seasonal base run by none other than the Germans. Chris, the Germans never left New Schwabenland. They may have lost World War II in Europe, but they continued their bases in New Schwabenland all the way to this modern age. So I was going through maps before my trip down there 6 years ago and going over the bases that were down there. And I had a map from the Cold War era. So it was about 1983 when the Berlin Wall was still up and Berlin was divided east and west. Lo and behold, the Neumayer base, which is run seasonally year-round, right there in New Schwabenland, now called Queen Maud Land, had the West German flag, as well as this base called the Conan Base, Konhen, inland over the polar plateau, which is a seasonal base. And then 2013, you can go on the Wayback Machine in Google and look at the Conan Base. They were doing an excavation of this large craft under the ice. And I love it when I can get corresponding data points. And that is when other researchers come up with information that support such information like this excavation under the ice. So the Farsight Institute, the remote viewers, Courtney Brown and some of his remote viewers, used the Conan base as a target. And they came back and said that indeed there is some kind of ancient giant craft in this location. They got in there. It was built for giants, much, much, much taller than we are, not humans at all. Very, very old and defunct. But I would propose that this is one of the three Nina, Pinta, or Santa Maria motherships that we've known about since the 70s. Wow. And I have a pretty good idea where the other two are, but I need some more corroborating information on that. So if any of your listeners want to be in touch with me, if they think they might know the location of these, especially GPS, I'm all ears.
Well, you mentioned a second trip to Antarctica that you really weren't able to make and it got delayed. Is there still any plans in the works to revisit?
So that was a trip with Brooks Agnew to the North Pole region on a Russian icebreaker. We were planning it around the time COVID hit 2021. That has been indefinitely delayed. But I do have another trip planned to Antarctica with a film crew. And this is what I'm working on with a company called VC Cross, a venture capital company who is looking to raise the funds to go back down there so we can film a documentary. And of course, I would go to many of these locations if we can, but to the Schumacher Ponds, for example, the South Pole, and then would like to see if we can touch down near the pyramid in the Ellsworth Range, and we can put that story to bed once and for all. Now, Chris, you got to understand, to do a trip inland, not only very expensive, you got to bring all your supplies with you. And there's only a window of time you can do a trip to Antarctica inland. And that's only between mid-November and mid-March. So right about now, the last tourists are heading down there. But we would want to go down for longer than a week or two, probably a month, if we could, to go to all these locations. And of course, you got to get permission.
Right.
But things are changing right now in our government. We see that there is this mood of transparency, and also a lot of these three-letter agencies are being revamped, opening up this idea that the citizen should know this information. So we might be able to put ourselves in the right place at the right time next year to go down there and possibly get access to some of these other locations.
You mentioned that you needed permission to get to some of these locations, and there are a lot of people that are of the belief that you can just freely travel anywhere in Antarctica. Talk a little bit about the permission that you need, and whose permission are we asking here?
Right. Well, so this is my conversation with Linda Moulton Howe, we just saw last week at the Conscious Life Expo, and her whistleblower, Brian S., who both say, wow, very ambitious plan. If you get the money, count me in. I'd love to be a part of it, if not just as a consultant, but in the case of Brian S., who is an accomplished pilot and navigator, to have him come and chart out our area. But both of them have said, you got to get past the NSA first. It's actually the National Science Foundation, the NSF, which writes the checks for everybody at all the American bases. But they also are pretty much in control of who goes where and why. So we'd also have to go through the National Science Foundation, but I think the NSA are the ones that call the shots for the National Science Foundation. So it's a little political battle to be able to go to these places. Now, there are places, and I even have a map that'll appear in my book, of tourist locations, places they say, yeah, you can go there. But then there are definitely other areas that are no-fly zones. One of which, of course, is where the giant hole in the ice, about 50 miles away from the South Pole Amundsen Scott Station, is located. So just to give your listeners a heads up, when I went down there 6 years ago on a sailboat, a private charter boat with 14 of us, 11 Poles and 3 Americans, the day before we set sail, we had to go to the Argentinian naval office where our captain submitted our plans to go. And we also had to give them photocopies of our passports. And then we went down to the passport area where cruise ship people come in, and we got stamped out of Argentina, but did not get stamped in anywhere else. But when we came back 26 days later, we got stamped back in to Argentina. So the point of this is, if you're going to the northern tip of the Palmer Peninsula, where we went, where 90% of boat traffic goes from Ushuaia, Argentina, you get stamped out and then stamped back in, but you're, for however long duration of your trip, you're in no man's land. But not go through the NSA at all. But the Palmer Peninsula is one of the busiest tourism corridors, if you want to call it that. Although we hardly saw any other ships, just once in a while a cruise ship or one or two other sailboats were going down there. But to go inland is a much different story. So for people that say, oh, yeah, you can just go anywhere. Well, you can to a degree. But again, you have to understand that Antarctica is huge. It's as big as the lower 48. So it's like saying, oh, yeah, well, I'll just cross-country ski from Nevada to Montana. Yeah. It's a lot farther than you think. And so the distances are vast. You have to bring every ounce of supplies with you, including fuel. And so it's a logistical challenge, as well as very expensive, to do these trips inland. But I do believe that if we were to do a tourist route to the Schumacher Ponds, to the South Pole, to the Pyramid and the Ellsworth Range, which is close to the Union Glacier, and then back up through Punta Arenas, Chile, where most of the flight traffic comes from, that we could probably get permission. But again, it's the challenge of financing and setting a trip up with so much logistics involved that you need about a year headway. So we're hoping to get the funding in the next month or two. And if we do, if VC Cross comes up with it, then we'll make this documentary and I'll be the lead on that trip.
Awesome, man. Well, we wish you luck. I hope you get that funding that you needed. Now, you mentioned earlier things are changing with our new administration. For the last few minutes that we have, how do you feel? Are you hopeful? I myself am, I'd say, extremely cautiously optimistic. I have no emotional attachment to politics, haven't in a very long time, so I can step back and see what is happening, what's being presented, as well as the sleight of hand that is also occurring that most people don't want to pay attention to because they're excited about everything else. But like I said, I will gladly accept any of the beneficial things that come out of this administration, but I will always have an eye on everything very closely. How do you feel about it?
I like your way of saying cautiously optimistic. I'm exactly the same way. What we've seen so far is very encouraging, that they will go into the core of the spending, the wasteful spending. And then this might be a way, when they get around to auditing the CIA, for example, or the NSA, to see how much wasteful spending they have, that could be justification for disbanding these organizations, or at least reforming them in such a way that perhaps this air of disclosure or transparency will feature into our trip down to Antarctica. I can just be cautiously optimistic that we are on the right track. We've never seen anything quite like this before. So it's very encouraging that we are on the right path to have this new era of openness and even disclosure very much in our crosshairs in the near future. I think in the next couple of years, even the next couple of months, Chris, I think are going to be a time of incredible revelations, the likes of which we've never seen on planet Earth or in the United States ever before.
Well, it is exciting to say the least. And Brad, thank you so much for coming on and giving us some sneak peek to this information that you'll put in your upcoming book. Very excited about that. One more time before we close out, let everyone know the best way to find more about you and get your books.
Yeah, absolutely. BradOlsen.com. You want to find out more about what I'm up to, including my conference schedule, and CCCPublishing.com for all my books. Secrets of Antarctica, which is the name of the book, Untold History Under the Ice, will not be out until the end of the year, although it is now in my distributor's catalog. So it should be appearing on Amazon within a month or two. And so people would be able to pre-order that book. But right now it is still in its production phase. So your listeners and viewers have just gotten a sneak peek that I've never done before, showing a lot of these images that are going to be in the book with some of this information about the Germans going deep under the ice into the core of Antarctica to find some advanced civilization down there. So very exciting news, and I'm really happy that I've had this opportunity to work with Frank, and other people have come to my aid with this book as well. And having this opportunity to talk to you, Chris, and your audience, and let them know that there is a lot of stuff that's going to be coming out with Antarctica. Not just my book, but I think in general, disclosure could very well come from what is found under the ice in Antarctica.
I love it, man. Fantastic information. Can't wait to hear more. And thank you so much once again for coming on. We'll definitely do this again very soon. Until next time, everyone, have a wonderful evening, and we will talk again tomorrow. See y'all then. We live in an incredible age of information. More and more, we're discovering that we've been lied to and misled about much of our human history. Cory Hughes is providing profound revelations about World War I, World War II, the JFK assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination, and much, much more on his new Substack, Bloody History. Subscribe now for as little as $5 monthly. Just click that link right in the description to get started now.